Well, good morning, everyone who has just joined and been admitted. I think we've got a few more people that are jumping in. We're just going to allow another minute or so for people to join, but we'll be kicking off in just about a minute or two. So hang in there. We're about ready to start. All right, Dan, if you want to go ahead and start recording, I'll kick things off.
You're good to go.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It looks like a chilly Tuesday out there as we head into the holidays, but I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you're here for the Growth Basics for Business monthly series on how to run a successful internship program, you've navigated to the right location. We've got a great presentation for you today. Before we get into the presentation, I wanted to do a couple of things, a couple of ground rules and housekeeping that we'll go over. But before I do any of that, I would like to introduce our sponsor for this event series, Eaton Peabody, and Nate Levesque is the marketing manager for Eaton Peabody. Nate's been a great partner over the last 3 years as Eaton Peabody has been our sole sponsor of this series. And I'd like to introduce Nate right now just to say a few words on his behalf. Nate?
Great. Thank you, Tommy. As he mentioned, I'm Nate Levesque. I'm the marketing manager for Eaton Peabody. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I'm a huge fan of these events. I've attended most of them, and I always walk away with something new, and I'm sure I'll be learning a lot today. For those of you that do not know Eaton Peabody, we are a full-service law firm based in Maine with more than 50 attorneys serving clients from offices in Augusta, Bangor, Brunswick, Ellsworth, and Portland. Whether you're an established large company looking to grow or a small business just looking for guidance, we can help. To learn more about our services, you can visit our website, eatonpeabody.com, or follow us on Facebook to stay up to date with legal updates or other presentations like this. Thank you very much. Tommy.
Thank you, Nate. And again, I can't say enough great things about Eaton Peabody and Nate. And when we do get these events live again, we do these typically in the Eaton Peabody conference room, which is beautiful. And Nate brings the absolute best breakfast desserts and treats. So I encourage you to continue to attend these once we go back to being live, hopefully post-COVID. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a couple of ground rules, housekeeping. If you have questions for the presenters, please put them into the chat function below. Everyone should have access to the chat feature on Zoom. So if you have a question for any of the presenters, please put it in the chat. If it's pertinent to anything that's going, that the speakers are covering right then and there, I will interrupt the speakers if it's appropriate. Otherwise, we'll save the time at the end of the presentation. We've got about 10 minutes built in for a Q&A, which I'll facilitate those questions that you put into chat to the speakers. Just a reminder, this presentation will be recorded. So if you would like to access it later, you can access it via the Chamber's website or through our YouTube channel. And just also another reminder that the whole event, including links to the video of the recording, additional resources, and today's slide presentation will be available in an email that will go out tomorrow. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three presenters today. First, we've got Renee Kelly, who's the Assistant Vice President for Innovation and Economic Development at the University of Maine. Renee serves as the liaison to the state's economic development community and identifies opportunities for the university to partner with national, state, regional, and local organizations to improve Maine's economy. Next, we've got Teresa Peak. She's a talent development consultant from Peak Learning Consultants, but she's also a member of ACE. ACE has been a partner of the Chamber for many years, and this year we've been using a lot of their consultants as facilitators, both for Growth Basics for Business, as well as through our blog content on the Chamber's website. Teresa's background spans various aspects of learning and organizational development and human resources. As a consultant, she specializes in leadership development, and prior to starting her consulting company, she worked for global organizations, often leading learning and development teams, which included Interns. Finally, we have Rebecca LaPierre, who's an associate in the Employment and Labor Practice Group with Eaton Peabody. Prior to joining Eaton Peabody, Rebecca graduated magna cum laude from University of Maine School of Law, where she was the online editor of the Ocean and Coastal Law Journal and the president of the Student Bar Association. We have three great presenters for you today. So without any further ado, let me introduce Renee Kelly. Renee?
Great, thank you, Tommy. And I think my slides will be coming up shortly. Great. So I'm going to talk, just kind of set the stage, I think, for our entire panel, talk a little bit about why to have an internship program or host an intern in your business, how to go about doing that, and where do you find interns? So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of having an intern. I think the thing that most people think about, and it's a really important one, is to build your talent pipeline and find future employees. Internships are essentially a great way to try before you buy. It's an opportunity to interact with someone, learn about their skills, see if they're a good fit with the culture of your business, and see if they could be a part of your company going forward. You can reduce your recruitment and onboarding by converting those interns into your future employees. And another really important thing to think about is if your interns have good experiences in your company, they will share that information with their friends. And so you'll create a whole cohort of people who are potentially interested in working in your company. It's also a great opportunity to complete special projects. If you have, something that could be completed in a discrete amount of time, those are great things for interns to tackle and accomplish. It's also an opportunity for your business to learn cutting edge ideas and technologies. These students are learning the latest and greatest in the classroom, and they can bring that knowledge to them or with them to your business. And it's an opportunity from a more sort of altruistic point of view to support and mentor students and help them be more successful professionals. A flip side of that, though, is that if you're engaging your current employees in supporting and mentoring those students, it's a great way for them to feel good about their job and encourages retention of current employees. And then, from an even bigger altruistic sort of point of view, in Maine, we're trying to retain and recruit talent in our state. And internships are a great way to help students see that there are great opportunities to work in companies in Maine. We had some students in our honors college a few years ago do a survey of young professionals in the Bangor area. And those who had done an internship while they were in school were twice as likely to stay in the community after they graduated. So it really does work to help keep people in our communities. So what are some of the best practices? How do you go about starting or having a good experience for both the student and your company? Well, I would say the starting point is to ask yourself these three questions. Why do you want to develop an internship or program? Make sure you have some specific goals in mind as you do that. And what do you hope to get out of that program? And really, probably most importantly, what will the student get out of the program? An internship is meant to be a learning experience. It's not a summer job or a school year job. It's meant to be something that will help the students develop professionally, add to what they're learning in the classroom. So you really should be mindful of what the student will get out of the internship experience. Some of the best practices, and this comes from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It's an organization that the University of Maine and other universities look to for information to support internships and employment. And at the University of Maine, we have a designation called the Flagship Internship program, which companies can seek. And we ask companies to adhere to these best practices. So the first one is to provide students with real work experiences. That's really number one to ensuring your program's success. Ideally, it's related to their major, but it should definitely be challenging and recognized by the organization as valuable and something that fills the entire length of the internship. You don't want students sort of twiddling their thumbs in the last week of their internship experience. Companies should provide orientation and training. And this includes, of course, sort of the standard onboarding training that you would provide to any employee, your safety and company policies and procedures. But think about the opportunities to provide sort of more industry-specific training or field-specific training to the students as part of their internship experience. You want to make them feel like they're really a part of the company for the internship, the length of the internship. Make sure to provide feedback on their work. Again, this is a learning experience. So if their work could use improvement, let them know, give them constructive feedback on how to make it better. If they're doing something really well, let them know that too, so that they can continue to build on that strong work. Another best practice is to provide mentoring and opportunities for networking and professional development. So matching someone up in your organization who's really going to be someone to whom they can go for questions, to provide advice, whether that's advice about the specific project or job, but career advice as well. And think about the opportunities maybe to take them, of course, it's completely different in this era, but take them to chamber events or other industry-specific events, even if they're virtual, to help them build out their professional network, help them feel really engaged in this professional experience. And again, the more connections and roots you can build for students through the internship experience, the more likely they are to consider a job in your company after they graduate or staying in your community once they graduate. And then finally, in terms of best practices, I would say it's really important to compensate students. I'm sure Rebecca is going to touch a little bit on this topic when she talks about some of the legal considerations, but I think about it from this perspective. If the student's being paid, then it's really clear that there are expectations on your part that they should perform their work and perform it well. And for you, you have skin in the game, which means you're going to pay attention to the intern. You're going to provide some of the training and feedback. And so when you're both invested in the internship experience financially, it helps you be both mentally invested in the experience as well. Some of the other things to think about if you are considering hosting an intern, one of the really challenging things for students can be finding housing at the location of your internship. I remember this experience when I was in college. I had an internship in Washington, D.C., and being from Maine and going to school in Massachusetts, that was definitely a challenging, potentially deal breaker for me to take the internship. So there's a way you can ideally even financially help support housing, or at least provide some connections to help students find housing for the internship experience. That's great. Of course, right now, a lot of people are doing remote internship experiences, which makes all of that a little bit easier. And it really opens up new opportunities for you to expand your talent pool, as well as students to explore their horizons a little more. Consider flexible working arrangements. Certainly the remote aspect is important right now, but think about flexible hours. Lots of students try to take if you're doing an internship during the semester. Of course, they have a course load, but even during the summer, many students these days are taking courses. So offer them some flexibility so that they can achieve all their goals during the internship. And another concept that I know the University of Maine, the University of Southern Maine, and other institutions are promoting, especially right now, are micro internships. So these might be 6 to 7 week experiences tops. And right now, a lot of students have an extended break between when they wrap up finals. Our students are wrapping up their finals this week, but they're not coming back to school until the end of January. So that's a pretty significant period of time to be off from school. Whoop. And so it might be an opportunity for them to get a little bit of work experience. So if you have a really short project that won't take a lot of time to complete, it might be an ideal time to engage an intern. Encourage them to be part of the team. Think about inviting career center staff and or faculty on site. The more they know about your business, the easier it is for them to recommend and communicate to potential interns what your company is all about. Provide opportunities to hear from or meet the leaders in the organization. Again, it just builds that engagement with the student. And on the flip side of that, provide opportunities for students to showcase their work. So there's sort of some pride of ownership at the end of their internship. And finally, conduct exit interviews. This is a great way to get feedback for you to continuously improve your internship program. I wanted to point out that the University of Maine has a really great internship guide, and since this is being recorded, and you'll be able to go back and grab this URL. This is where it's located, and it has some really valuable information for employers in thinking about hiring interns and recruiting interns. Okay, so where do you find great interns? Of course, there are the campus career centers. Virtually every campus on a college or university has a career center for its students, and that's a great place to post jobs. But think about a deeper relationship with that campus career center. As I mentioned earlier, invite them to your business. You can very often host information sessions in coordination with the campus career centers to let students know about your business. And sometimes faculty and staff go to those information sessions as well, so they can make better connections for their students. There are career fairs, and again, this year, a lot of the career fairs are being done virtually. So it makes it a whole lot easier to jump on a virtual career fair than to schlep your booth, hundreds of miles potentially to meet students. And look out for specialized career fairs specific to your particular industry. At the University of Maine, every October, we have an engineering job fair. And this year, we're hoping to have some additional specialized job fairs around outdoor recreation and perhaps even a virtual construction job fair. Building relationships is really important. Again, these people are in key positions to recommend students to your company. And then think about some of your perhaps more traditional marketing strategies, social media, networking events. And thinking about social media, very often students they're not on Facebook, they're not on LinkedIn all that often. But it can be an opportunity we've found in recruiting students for a program that I run to make parents and faculty and other people who know students aware of your internship opportunity, and they can recommend it to potential interns. And then there are a bunch of programs that can really make finding interns a lot easier for the company. They sort of take that burden and on themselves and help connect you with potential interns. So here are just a few of them. Innovate for Maine is one that my team coordinates at the University of Maine. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Flagship Internship is another University of Maine designation that allows employers who have really high quality internship experiences to be designated as a flagship internship and be able to promote that with students, so students know they'll get a high quality experience if they work with that employer. The University of Maine Graduate and Professional Center has a graduate internship program building on the MBA program, the public policy program, and the School of Law. So it's these students are all graduate students, so a little higher level in terms of experience and potentially research capability. USM has what they call the Maine Economic Improvement Fund internships, which place students in certain sectors. Another one at the University of Maine, the Maine Government Student Summer Internship Program for municipalities, towns, state government, nonprofit organizations. So those are all ways, if you connect with those programs, they can help connect you to interns. And then I also wanted to mention Focus Maine briefly. They don't necessarily help you find the interns, but they provide a lot of support once you have interns. They provide a lot of networking and events to support students and ensure that they have a good experience. And just really quickly about Innovate for Maine, the focus of this particular internship is around innovation. We place students with companies that have innovation projects, either new processes, new products or services, or expanding their markets. We do place students in a lot of startups, but also in existing companies that are innovating as well. And for those early stage companies, we actually help subsidize the cost of the intern. And so in the last, since 2012, we've placed more than 200 students in more than 200 companies around the state. And a unique thing about this program is that we accept any student from who's from Maine or attending a Maine college or university into the program. So again, it's also about building those connections to the state so that they're more likely to stay in Maine after graduation.
Hey, Renee, that was fantastic. We did have one question that came from the audience. I wonder if you wouldn't mind answering that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, let me read this off to you. It was, could you go a little bit more into detail about how a program can gain the flagship internship designation? How do you determine the level of quality?
Yep. There is an application on the University of Maine Career Center website. And essentially what we ask companies to certify is that they will adhere to those NACE best practices. And so those, you might go on the website, check out those best practices and see if you can design your internship around those best practices. And we sort of preliminarily accept companies that can demonstrate they meet those best practices, but we engage with the company once they have the intern to continuously validate that they're upholding those standards.
Thank you. I think we're going to tee up Teresa now.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background about my intern experience and then segue into the intern interview questions. So I worked for global companies. My last large company that I worked for was in the Houston area, and we had a very robust internship program where we bring in excess of 50 interns. I was very lucky to work with one of them. As well as I've worked with interns with the University of Maine system on a project that I've done for USM or USM. I never get the acronyms right. UMS. So when I as a learning and development manager, one of the things that I worked on was helping managers ask good interview questions and go through the hiring process in I don't want to say a prescriptive way, but in a way that there was repeatability, obviously for legal ramifications. And I'm sure Rebecca will get into some of that as well. So one of the things we did is we handled all of our interviews for interns the same as we would for regular employees. And two things that we covered in interviewing was behavioral-based interviewing questions as well as skill-based interview questions. But now you're interviewing somebody with possibly not a lot of experience. And talking about my two interns that I'm going to focus on as we talk about this, one was a graduate student coming to us with very little job experience, but a lot of obviously educational experience. And the other one was coming with a lot of job experience, but in a completely different area. She had worked in retail. So if you're thinking about hiring somebody, let's talk about behavioral-based questions. You're usually focused on things like decision-making, planning, organizing, problem-solving. How do you translate a question that you would ask a regular hire with job experience into a question that you can ask an intern? So here's a question. I'm trying to take us out of the learning and development space, which is the space that I'm familiar with. So let's say here's a behavioral-based question for a regular employee. I'm sure you've had times where you've worked with multiple things competing for your attention. Tell me about a time where you had to balance multiple clients. How did you handle the situation? That's probably a great question for somebody coming into your organization, but maybe not the best question for an intern. So how do you change that up? Well, they've been in school. They've had multiple projects. They've had to work with multiple different teams on projects. You can switch that question up to gather similar information that you would for a full-time hire from your intern. Same thing with skills-based questions. Here you're talking about what they need to be successful on the job. A lot of times that's technology related. You might ask a regular hire, what's the most innovative solution you've provided to a technical challenge? But your interns have had similar technical experiences, and you can rework that question to talk about, instead of a technical challenge, an innovative technical solution that they came up for a project that they were working on at school. The other thing that I want to mention is STAR, and you may have noticed that my questions kind of lead to very specific answers. Within interviewing, there's something called STAR. STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So you're really trying to get that intern to tell you about the situation or task that they were involved in. What actions did they take, and what were the results? That doesn't always have to be positive. We learn from our mistakes. So it's trying to situate that question so that your intern, your potential intern, is talking about their actual experience, not what they would do in a situation. Thank you. All right, so I mentioned I've had two interns that I'm going to talk about, and I'm really calling this slide the good, the bad, and the ugly. Managing an intern is very different than managing an employee with experience. And that could be from so many different perspectives. Thinking about the last intern that I worked with at the University of Maine System Project, the young lady had come out of retail. Well, retail is a very different environment than an office environment. In this case, we were not co-located. None of us were co-located. And you know, this was her first foray into working in the virtual world. It was also my first foray into working with an intern in the virtual world. And there was some good, there was some not so good. It didn't really get ugly, but you have to then understand how you have to morph your management style to help a person who, in this case, was a junior in college, where my previous intern was in her master's program. You have to morph your management style into what's appropriate for your intern. And the thing there is, here's the challenge. Just like every employee of yours is different, every intern is different, and every intern's needs are going to be a little bit different. So you have to, put that situational leadership hat on, so to speak, and figure out what your intern needs and how you need to manage that intern. Some need a little bit more hand-holding. Some need a little bit more freedom. Renee mentioned that cutting-edge technology and cutting-edge ideas, that was one of the biggest benefits, and that really is my third bullet. Their perspective is different. So sometimes you kind of do have to be a little bit hands-off and let them take the lead, because I'll be fully transparent. I'm a 50-something-year-old woman. My way of thinking is very different than a 20-something. And the way I use technology, although I think I keep up pretty well, is very different. Feedback. And I know Renee mentioned this as well. Feedback is so critical. And feedback may come in very different aspects than with a full-time employee who's coming to you with experience. Sometimes the feedback, thinking about my intern while I was in Houston, she had very little work experience. The feedback wasn't always about her work and the work product. Sometimes the feedback was about norms. I think Houston makes the national news occasionally with flooding. And, I would get text messages just threw me for a loop completely. But it's raining. Do I need to come to work today? Okay, it's raining. It rains every day practically in Houston. The feedback was, okay, it's time to grow up a little bit. And that sometimes is a very hard conversation for a manager to have with their intern. Feedback with my intern at the University of Maine project was very different. It was mostly more towards work product, because she thought in the eyes of a 20-something in coming out of the retail environment. That was not necessarily the same perspective that people were going to have looking at the training product we were working on. So providing that feedback is critical. And the other thing I want to mention, and this is a pet peeve, and anybody who's ever worked with me knows this, there is positive feedback and there is constructive feedback. It's not constructive criticism. It's not negative feedback. The feedback that you're giving your intern really is shaping them early in their career. So that feedback really needs to be given with, sorry, corny term, but love and care, because this is some of their first experiences. You don't want to make it seem like a grade, and you don't want to burst their bubble, but you have to give them that feedback. And sometimes that's a difficult conversation. And I hope you guys do not hear the winds that we are experiencing up here. So I'm in down East Maine. I'm up near Eastport, and the wind is wicked. And I don't know if my earbuds are picking it up. Hopefully not. And hopefully the power will stay on. Going back to that, their perspective is different. Their perspective is different in so many ways. Possibly because of age, possibly because of gender, possibly because of ethnicity. But also they're learning all of the new stuff that we're not always learning. They're also thinking very differently. And my last company was a software company, so we had a very diverse workforce, not only in nationality, but in age. And the great thing that my intern brought, and this goes into a little bit of what's going to get into the next slide, is she brought a perspective that I didn't have. And that was, she was not really techie working with these software people, but she had that more cutting edge of what is cool today to the people who are not in my age bracket. And you can advance the slide. So why would you want to hire? Well, part of it is exactly what I just said. They've they've brought this fresh perspective that you don't have. So that's a huge asset. They've also been doing the work. Hopefully, and Renee mentioned this, you've given them real projects. You've given them things where they can make an impact. I actually transitioned my intern from her summer intern program at the software company to staying on as an intern while she finished her master's and then converted her to a full-time employee. There was this great continuity in what she was doing that didn't end. Schools in Texas go back in August. I'm not sure about Maine schools, but it didn't end in August. It continued then through that next semester. They've also hopefully become part of the team. In our case, we were part of an HR department. We sat in what we called the HR bullpen, and she had bonded with people. She had bonded with people inside the team. She had bonded with people outside of the team. I ran a mentorship program. She bonded with some of the mentors and mentees because I literally had her shadow me through that mentor program. She ended up taking on the mentor program as one of her first tasks as a full-time employee. So she had integrated herself. She'd been doing the work, and she also kept me young. I will say that. I mean, although I didn't appreciate the text that it was raining, but our employees expected text. We had moved to pulse surveys using text. I don't think if it wasn't for having interns, some of our experiences at my previous company would have been the way that they were. So it's worth it. Experiences, and it's hard for me to get the hands on the screen at the same time. Experience is a great thing, and it brings so much of a positive, but sometimes the limited experience in the professional world brings a whole host of new possibilities. And with that, yes, I'm going to segue to Rebecca.
Hello, everyone. Well, now we get the very exciting legal part of this presentation. Everyone loves talking about laws first thing in the morning. So when do you have to pay an intern? That's going to be different depending on whether or not your business is a nonprofit or a for-profit business. I'm primarily going to be talking about for-profit businesses. If you are a nonprofit, generally unpaid interns are going to be okay. You do still have to, it will still depend on certain factors, but generally it's going to be considered okay for a nonprofit. For a for-profit business, which I imagine most of you here today are in for-profit businesses, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. No, we don't really have a Maine state law that applies to unpaid interns. There are general wage and hour laws for Maine. There are unfair agreement laws in Maine, so you do need to be cognizant of those things. But when it comes to internships specifically, we don't have an express law that prohibits unpaid internships or limits them. However, you will still need to comply with the federal law under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the Department of Labor in 2018 updated what they consider to be their test for determining if an employee, if an intern is considered an employee that must be paid, or if it is permissible to have them be an unpaid intern. And the test is, we're going to go through it here. There's the fact sheet from the Department of Labor is up on your screen. And I want to point out that this is considered a primary beneficiary test. You do not have to meet every single one of the factors. No single factor is more determinative than any of the others, but generally they would look to the overall test and whether or not the primary benefit of the internship is for the intern who is going to be getting a learning experience, or if the primary benefit is for the business who is essentially getting free labor. So that's what you really need to be thinking about is, are you providing a benefit to your intern or are you providing more of a benefit to your business? And the way they're going to look at that is by looking at all of these 7 factors. So we'll go through them a little bit and I can give you some idea of what you would be looking for or how this might apply. So the first factor is going to be the extent to which the intern and the employer clearly understand that there is no expectation of compensation. Any promise of compensation, expressed or implied, suggests that the intern is an employee and vice versa, meaning you are an employer. So what they mean by that is if you even hint at that you might pay them, that might create an implied understanding that there is going to be compensation. Now, the best way to avoid this is to get something in writing. You always want to make sure if you have a intern, especially an unpaid intern, that you're getting an agreement in writing that clearly states what the expectations are, whether or not there will be compensation. And note that if express or implied means that expressly you said I will pay you or I will not pay you. Implied could be, oh yeah, you get all sorts of benefits from this program. It's super valuable. That could be an implied compensation. So you want to be careful with that. And like I said, make sure you get it in writing and have it be a signed agreement so that it's very clear what the expectations are. The second factor is going to be the extent to which the internship provides training that would be similar to that which would be given in an educational environment, including the clinical and other hands-on training provided by educational institutions. Is your intern learning something from this experience? If they aren't learning anything, then it's not going to qualify to be an unpaid internship. It has to be something akin to an educational environment where the intern is really gaining some sort of education like they would if they were going to school. So for instance, if you just have an intern grabbing coffee for everyone every morning, that's probably not super educational for them unless they're, training to go into the, I don't know, assistant industry or coffee industry maybe, but you need to be providing educational opportunities for that intern in order for it to qualify. The next category is going to be the extent to which the internship is tied to the intern's formal education program by integrated coursework or the receipt of academic credit. Now, again, you don't have to have every single one of these factors, so the intern does not necessarily have to be getting academic credit or some sort of training or coursework that coincides with the internship. But if you do have that, it's going to help your argument that it can be an unpaid internship. So if you're working with a university or a college and you have some sort of overlap where they're doing coursework based on their internship, they're writing papers for their class from their experience with their internship, or they're getting college credit for their internship, that's going to help to make your argument that you can have an unpaid internship. Number 4 is going to be the extent to which the internship accommodates the intern's academic commitments by corresponding to the academic calendar. You're going to have an easier time claiming that this is an appropriate unpaid internship if it's over the summer break or the winter break or the spring break versus if it's, right in the middle of their day when they should be in class. Probably, a 9 to 5 in the fall semester, unless they're getting credit for it, is probably going to be a little bit questionable. If they're getting credit for it, it makes a little bit more sense why they're not in class during that period and they are in fact doing this internship for you and maybe don't need to be paid for it. Number 5 is the extent to which the internship's duration is limited to the period in which the internship provides the intern with beneficial learning. So are they getting good quality experience for the entire period that they're there? Are they there for the summer to learn and then in the fall they just start doing, whatever work it is that you don't have anybody else to do? That's going to be more questionable. The extent to which, number 6 is going to be the extent to which the intern's work complements rather than displaces the work of paid employees while providing significant educational benefits to the intern. So is your intern there to take the place of somebody that you would have otherwise hired and paid? If that's the case, you're going to have some difficulty. If the intern is there to assist and help and learn and is really benefiting from the experience and not so much providing a benefit to your business, and they're not just providing you with free labor, that's going to help. But if they are, say you have an open position and you're like, oh, we won't hire anybody, we'll just get a free intern, that's going to be questionable. And then the last one is the extent to which the intern and the employer understand that the internship is conducted without entitlement to a paid job at the conclusion of the internship. So as my colleagues here have been discussing, you can offer a job to the intern at the end of the internship, and that's a great thing to do. But if you're not going to pay the intern, and the factors that are going to come into whether or not you have to pay the intern, you want to take a look at what understanding there is. Does the intern expect to get a job out of this at the end? Are they working for free with the expectation that it's going to lead to a job at the end? That might be a little questionable. Versus, are they doing this purely for experience, purely for educational purposes, and then maybe they happen to get a job at the end of it, versus expecting to get a job at the end of it. You're going to have to look at those factors. So again, this is a overall test. It is not any single factor that really is going to determine whether or not you have to pay your intern. So this is going to be very fact specific. It's going to depend on your business. It's going to depend on what role the intern is playing at your business. It's going to depend on, who the intern is and what expectations they have and what expectations you may have given them. It's going to depend on what kind of an agreement you've established with them. And it's going to depend on what type of work that they are doing for you while they're there, and sort of what you're asking them to do and how much educational benefit they're getting from it. When it comes down to it, the big question is the internship a benefit to the intern, or is the internship a benefit to the business? And if it's a benefit to the business, you need to be paying them because they will be considered an employee. If it's really a benefit to the intern, they're getting an educational experience out of it. They are not expecting to be paid. They have not been told they will or might be paid. And they are really learning something that they can use to build their resume, to grow as a potential future employee, then you might be okay with it. But it's going to be very fact specific. And if you're not sure, the safest bet is to pay them at least minimum wage. And the second safest bet is to call your lawyer and figure it out with them. So I think that's about all I have, unless there's some questions. Are there any questions, Tommy?
Yes, Rebecca, there are a couple questions just came in, and I'm going to read them off to you. One question came in: are there other legal documents other than Fact Sheet 71 that need to be considered when deciding whether an intern must be paid?
Well, so it's not necessarily a legal document. That's the fact sheet is more of like a guideline that the Department of Labor publishes that can kind of help you to understand what their rule is. But like I said, it's going to be very fact dependent. So every situation is going to be different. There's not really necessarily like a piece of paper that's going to tell you definitively yes or no. It's something that you're going to want to really look at the specific details of your situation. And again, it's going to depend on what state you're in as well. I presume most of the folks here are only employing folks in Maine, but if you're in another state, there could be state laws that will apply. And depending on the facts of your situation, there could be case law that applies from court cases. So I don't have any other documents necessarily for you, but oh, sorry, my phone's ringing. But there will potentially be other laws that would come into play.
Excellent. And then just one other question. I'm not sure how exactly what this is related to, but what about workers' comp, insurance, things like that?
So again, that's all going to depend on if the employee or if the intern is considered an employee or not. If they're considered an employee, your usual laws like workers' comp, things like that are probably going to apply. Insurance, that's a whole other question. You might want insurance for the intern, even if they're not considered an employee. It just depends on the type of insurance you're looking at. If we're talking about unemployment insurance, it's going to depend on if they are considered an employee or not under the law. Some of those would be, affected by state laws. You're also going to want to consider in 2021, we have a new unpaid leave law, which may or may not apply to to the intern depending on certain factors. There are some exceptions for students that are employees, but they're very specific exceptions. So if the intern is determined to be an employee, you're going to have to look at all of the same things you would look at with any other employee.
Thank you, Rebecca. No surprises. There's a lot of questions with regards to the legal aspect of it. One more question came through. What about if the intern is unpaid and there is no credit? Where does the liability lie?
Well, so again, there's not any one specific factor that will determine whether or not the intern must be paid. Having the intern get credit, college credit for the internship will help to make the argument that the intern doesn't need to be paid, but it doesn't necessarily determine if the intern should be paid or not. So if you have an unpaid internship where there's no college credit, you're going to want to look to all those other factors. And again, you want to figure out whether the benefit of the internship is for the intern or the benefit of the internship is for the business.
Got it. So other questions that came in earlier, this might be for the entire group, but back to when Renee was talking a little bit about orientation and training, some of the feedback that the intern might receive. If it's a small organization without a lot of resources, I'll use ourselves, the chamber, for example. We're an 8-person staff, nonprofit. We don't have a lot of resources. Are there resources that you can model? Is there a template somewhere that someone can find or identify, in terms of how they can provide a proper orientation or training with feedback?
Yeah. There certainly are, and Teresa might know some of these as well, sort of templates for employee handbooks and that sort of thing. But I think it's also just really important to help them understand your business. So what's your culture? How does your business operate? That's the kind of training that's really important, so that they know to sort of they know what the expectations are and how they can best fit into the organization. But certainly there are, and again, I'll defer to some of my colleagues, there are lots of resources out there for model policies or sort of the more general safety, sexual harassment, et cetera, types of things.
And I'll agree on that. There's stuff that you can find online about how to give good feedback, et cetera.
Thank you. Just time for a couple more questions here. I know that Teresa had mentioned when you're managing an intern, sometimes there's that tough love that needs to come into play. Is it best for that message or that that feedback to come from the organization's leader or someone who's really more closely attached to the intern, someone like their mentor? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I'll give you a personal opinion. I have always worked for large organizations. Obviously working with the University of Maine system was a very small project, and there were 2 of us working with the intern. In all cases, it's always come from the person working with the intern, as opposed to somebody higher up in the food chain. So if you're set up where the intern has a mentor, I think because of that relationship, it would be better coming from that mentor. But every organization is a little bit different. So if your norm is the leader is the one who gives feedback to the employees, then I would make that consistent with your intern as well.
I'd agree with that. I think, that person in that mentoring role can be a really valuable person. Certainly, some direct feedback on work product can come from whoever's supervising the project. And of course, key, just like in any management situation, setting clear expectations up front is really key to setting them up for success overall. I know that, for instance, in the Innovate for Maine program that we run, and you might look at this for some of the other programs, you might also consult with the people in that internship program if that's the source of your intern for their advice on feedback and mentoring. In our case, we mentor the students in the program in addition to whatever kind of mentorship they're getting in their internship placement.
Thank you. And I've got time for one more question. Of course, we wouldn't get out of a virtual presentation without a COVID-related question. But have any of you been hearing about any Maine companies adapting to a remote structure for internships? Are firms deciding not to proceed with internships until COVID has passed? And do you think the remote experience can lessen the overall benefits of an internship?
I've seen lots of companies still have internships. I've heard of a few who have passed over into remote internships because whatever kind of experience they were hoping to provide was very hands-on work, and so that becomes more challenging to offer remotely, obviously. But most companies I've worked with, and even in our Innovate for Maine program last year, or this past summer, we provided remote experiences, and I think for the most part, people were really positive about the outcomes of those. The students, because opportunities were somewhat slimmer this summer, I think they put even extra effort into succeeding in their internships. Of course, it might matter a little bit on the level of experience of the students who are younger, have less work experience, might require more coaching and checking in on a regular basis than, say, a graduate student doing an internship.
Yeah, and I would add to that, in terms of the legal side of things, there's different liability with remote work. So you'd want to make sure that you have a teleworking policy of some sort if you are going to have a remote internship. Make it clear what the expectations are. Make it clear, where they're supposed to be working, what environment, they're supposed to be working in, making sure you don't end up with a workers' comp claim because they're doing work in bed and get, a bad back from it or something. So you want to take those things into consideration as well with any remote worker, including interns. And I would also note that in terms of your question about what other businesses are doing, we've seen, depending on the industries, different types of businesses have either been postponing their internships for a limited time, or some have gone to remote work, or have just limited the number of interns that they're taking. So it's, I think that there's a very wide variety of ways to deal with employees and interns, during the COVID period. But you also want to note that with COVID, there are also certain laws relating to paid sick leave and things like that. So if you have a paid intern, you're going to want to consider those factors as well.
Well, thank you all for the great presentation, the great feedback. It was a great event for all of us today. And again, I want to thank each of our three presenters for being here today and giving us some additional information on a very valuable tool for all businesses, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. I can tell you at the Chamber, we definitely recognize the value of internships. One of our core staffers, and we are a staff of 8, she came to us by way of an internship. And then once she was completed her internship, we actually brought her on board and hired her full time. So we can speak from firsthand example of the value of internships. For those of you that are attending, just keep in mind that all Chamber events can be found on our website, portlandregion.com, under events. And another reminder, this event was recorded and will be available on our website and YouTube channel. The post-event email will go out tomorrow. That will include the slides from today's presentation, a link to the video, and other resources that you can use in your efforts to secure and retain interns. So with that, I will say thank you and goodbye, and have a great holiday season. We'll see you next year.